This highlights the fact that there are three main terms used for the Sea of the Exodus that have developed over the centuries. Placing them on the wall of time, I could see that first came the Hebrew word Yam Suph. It shows up in the book of Exodus around 1450 BC, and it has always been called Yam Suph in Hebrew to this day. Then this location name was identified as the Red Sea in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. Finally, some scholars began to translate the Hebrew term Yam Suph as Sea of Reeds. For a long time, it was thought that this Sea of Reeds was the same place as the Red Sea at the Gulf of Suez. Why do the authors of the Septuagint use the term Red Sea? Do you have any question, or have you thought about that at all?
I think the Septuagint translators used the best guess as to what the Hebrews meant. So they were translating a text from Hebrew which was 1,000 years old, and they had a consensus that this meant the Red Sea, and since we're talking to what was to them a modern audience, they said, let's use a term that everybody knows, and so they used the term Red Sea. But it is a interpretation, it's not a strict translation of Yam Suph, of course, and so some of the modern translations have recognized this and called this the Sea of Reeds. So they inadvertently changed the story, and because the Septuagint was so highly revered and respected, that became kind of one of the ideas that it had to refer to something which extends from Suez southward and not northward. Okay. But I don't think that is a correct understanding of the history of how the versions of the Bible came to be.
I see. So what you're suggesting is that the Septuagint actually sort of was a shift from the way it might have been, where it was the lakes area, or like Lake Manzala, moved the emphasis down to these bigger bodies of water.
Yes, that was their best understanding of how it happened, and the modern or what they call the modern translation of the term in Hebrew, and so that's just what they used.
When you read the biblical text and you see either the Red Sea or sometimes it says Sea of the Reeds, personally I don't like that at all, because that is an interpretation. There is many different interpretations of this name. And to me, the only honest thing to say is that the crossing took place at Yam Suph, because that was the name of the place at that time. So people get completely lost when they start to work with different interpretations.
They decided to use Eruthra thalassa. This is the origin of the words in English, Red Sea. Eruthra is the word for red, the color red in Greek. And thalassa is the Greek word for sea or lake. It can be used to refer to, a sea, a lake, a large body, a small body, and so forth. And it's exactly the same word that Jerome chose then in Latin. When he was translating into Latin, he says mare, that's the Latin word for sea, and rubrum, which is the Latin word for the color red. So Yam Suph in Hebrew becomes Eruthra thalassa in Greek, and mare rubrum in Latin. Eruthra thalassa, according to Fritz, cannot identify the Gulf of Aqaba.
Actually, Glenn Fritz acknowledges that the Greek concept of the Red Sea included all the bays of the Red Sea. It is the Hebrew term Yam Suph that he proposes only referred to the Gulf of Aqaba. But this brings another important factor, which is that the New Testament also calls the sea crossed during the Exodus the Red Sea. So it's not just the Greek version of the Old Testament that uses this term.
All the toponyms we have tell us that Yam Suph is up here, but of course the Greek version of the Bible tells us that this is called the Red Sea, not the Yam Suph. So we're in a situation where we have a contradiction between the Masoretic text and the Greek text.
The details explain why and where in many cases.
However, Glenn Fritz notes that the Bible consistently puts the toponym of Yam Suph at Aqaba, not Egypt, and in his view, there is not a contradiction between the Greek and Hebrew terms.
In the New Testament, I think the Red Sea is mentioned twice, but they're deferring to the Septuagint Greek use of Erythra thalassa. The New Testament was written in Greek, and they're using the Greek term for the Red Sea in the New Testament. Now, technically, the Red Sea is not erroneous because the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba are both parts of the Red Sea. So the idea of Red Sea is not erroneous. It's just the Red Sea term itself does not give us enough definition to say where on the Red Sea this occurred. It doesn't define that there are gulfs and places within those gulfs.
Something I realized is that if the Greek concept of the Red Sea did not include marsh lakes in Egypt's Nile Delta, then the New Testament's use of that term would be in error if the Exodus sea crossing actually happened at one of those lakes, as the Egyptian approach proposes.
However, the Red Sea term itself, as it's used in the Bible, is not erroneous. It just happens to be an inadequate geographical explanation.